In 1990, Neil Young and Crazy Horse wrote a song called Why Do I Up? Have you ever woken up in the morning with a headache and thought to yourself, why did I drink so much last night? Or maybe you had an important conversation and then after the conversation had finished, you thought to yourself, why didn't I say XXX? In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 books that tell us why we sometimes end up fighting with ourselves or do things that we don't really understand. I want to cover 3 really interesting books that touch on this topic. You can make your own conclusions about how useful this information is to you, but watch at the end and see what I think. Keep watching until the end of the video to find out how I think this information can be useful for you. Okay, let's talk about the first author. This is a very famous book called Fast and Slow Thinking by Daniel Kahneman. I hope I got the name correct there. You might well have heard of this book. Kahneman talks about the idea of System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast thinking part of your mind that has the freewheeling impulses that happen. It's where your brain does things that you don't even know you're doing. System 2 is the slow thinking part of your mind that requires concentration and attention. The book by Kahneman focuses on the interesting results of the System 1 and how much System 1 actually affects the way you behave. Here is a quote from the book. Conflict between an automatic reaction and an intention to control it is common in our lives. We are all familiar with the experience of trying not to stare at the oddly dressed couple at the neighbouring table in a restaurant. We also know what it is like to force our attention on a boring book where we constantly find ourselves returning to the point at which the reading has lost its meaning. The next one is a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Happiness Hypothesis. And Jonathan Haidt writes obviously about happiness, but at the start of the book he talks about the metaphor of the elephant and the rider. For Haidt, our minds are like the elephant and the rider. This is where the rider is the advisor. He guides the elephant, or she guides the elephant. And then the elephant is everything else. Your desires, your feelings, your intuition. Here's a quote from Jonathan Haidt. I'm holding the reins in my hands, and by pulling one way or another, I can tell the elephant to turn, to stop, to go. I can direct things, but only when the elephant doesn't have desires of his own. When the elephant really wants to do something, I'm no match for him. That's a quote about the elephant. Here's what Jonathan Haidt says about the rider. The rider can see further into the future, and the rider can learn valuable information by talking to other riders or by reading maps. But the rider cannot order the elephant around against its will. And the other writer who also touches on this subject is Steve Peters in his book called The Chimp Paradox. Staying with the metaphor of animals, Steve Peters doesn't use elephants, he uses chimps and humans. So he says that there are 2 key players in your mind. One of them he calls the chimp and the other the human. Now, the human is the rational, thinking, reasonable part. It's kind of like the part of your mind that you want to be. If you like, it is the sensible, good part of your mind. So Steve Peters calls the human you. You are the human. However, we also have the chimp. And you can guess what the chimp is like. The chimp is the emotional, reactional part of your mind. Now, Steve Peters links the chimp and the human to physical parts in the brain and refers to how these parts of the brain function and the role that they play in making you do things. Here is what Steve Peters tells us about the chimp. The chimp is the emotional machine that we all possess. It thinks independently from us and can make decisions. It offers emotional thoughts and feelings that can be very constructive or very destructive. It is not good or bad, it is a chimp. A central part to Steve Peters' teaching is all about how you manage the interaction between the chimp part of your brain and the human part of your brain. Here's another quote related to this relationship. You and your chimp typically have an uneasy relationship that frequently involves compromise and conflict. It is often a battle of power between the two of you. So there we have three renowned authors discussing a similar topic related to the different ways in which your brain functions. System 1 and System 2, the elephant and the rider, and the chimp and the human. If you want to learn more, I've got links to the books in the description below. They are definitely worth reading. So what does this stuff mean to us? How can we use it? Well, here are my ideas on how this information can be useful to you. Firstly, if and when you do find yourself in an emotionally charged situation and you find yourself reacting automatically, often with anger or frustration or something, then knowing this might help you to pause a bit more and let your rational brain, your rider or your human to actually catch up. Secondly, I think that this information can help us to be more forgiving with ourselves when we make mistakes. After all, we're going to make mistakes every day, and there's no point beating ourselves up about it. It is often the System 1 or the elephant in action that we have not been present enough to control. And then lastly, I think this knowledge helps us to see reality more clearly. Very often our brains give us biases and we have blind spots that stop us from seeing things really as they are. So knowing this concept can help us to look at things and see the reality more clearly. This is only going to help us moving forward. I hope you found this video useful. This is the Spirit and Action YouTube channel. Please help me out and hit subscribe on the button and join the conversation and the community where we all talk about how to improve your mind and translate that into action. I'll see you for the next video. In the meantime, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, day, evening, or week.